Well, yesterday, as I began reading the newest indictment of Donald Trump, I wondered if this indictment would exist without Nancy Pelosi. The roadmap for the conspiracies described in this indictment was provided to the Justice Department by Nancy Pelosi through the work of the January 6th committee that she created. On the darkest day in the history of American presidential transitions of power, January 6, 2021, America was lucky that Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. As Donald Trump's attackers of the Capitol were trying to find her, she was rushed from the building along with other Democratic and Republican members of the congressional leadership. The next day, she began planning the second impeachment of Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection at the Capitol. 57 senators voted to convict Donald Trump, including 7 Republicans, but that was not enough to reach the 2/3 of 67 for conviction required by the Constitution. Nancy Pelosi did not stop at impeachment. She appointed a special January 6th committee to investigate everything that Donald Trump and his associates did leading up to and on January 6th to try to overthrow the presidential election and overthrow American democracy in the process. Each member of that committee was chosen by Speaker Pelosi, including the 2 Republican members. They conducted a 10-month investigation, relying heavily on a highly experienced investigative staff before making their first evening, primetime, nationally televised presentation of evidence to the nation. They obtained massive amounts of information using subpoenas. Some of their subpoenas to Republican officials were ignored. They recommended Steve Bannon for prosecution for ignoring their subpoena, and Merrick Garland's Justice Department convicted Steve Bannon of contempt of Congress. He has not yet been sentenced, pending his appeal of that conviction. People who were eager to know the truth criticized the committee for moving too slowly. There was much public doubt about what the committee could accomplish, with some of their subpoenas being ignored and Republicans like Mike Pence refusing to cooperate with the committee in any way. I shared much of that doubt myself. Congressional investigative committees are notoriously bad at investigating. No one runs for the House or Senate saying, I will be the best investigator in the building. Some of them have previous experience as federal prosecutors, but they never have investigative tools as powerful as the tools available to federal prosecutors like Jack Smith. Congressional investigative committees are often plagued by egomania when the cameras are on them, with every member wanting to make the most of their 5 or 10 minutes on camera. Nancy Pelosi eliminated all of those built-in defects to congressional investigative committees by choosing the specific members she chose, who all realized that the work of their committee was much more important than any attention they might get for their service on the committee. It is impossible for me to exaggerate my personal shock at the discovery that not every member of the January 6th committee would get to speak in every one of the hearings. That is the very point of being on a televised committee, to get your star turn on television every time. In most of the committee's public meetings, most of the members of the committee did not speak. And public presentations by the committee were simply the best in the history of congressional committees. And again, that was thanks entirely to the design of the committee, as well as the supremely thorough work done by the committee staff and the members in preparation for every public presentation. And it is thanks to the work of the January 6th committee that the indictment we read yesterday felt like something we've read before, the report of the January 6th committee. Very importantly, Jack Smith's indictment of Donald Trump has more detail than the January 6th committee was able to discover, because a federal prosecutor's subpoena power is much more immediately effective and enforceable than congressional subpoena power. Mike Pence, who refused to speak to the January 6th committee, was subpoenaed to speak to Jack Smith's grand jury. And Mike Pence did not just show up to testify. He also obeyed a subpoena to hand over documents, including his notes, to Jack Smith, who specifically refers to Mike Pence's notes in the indictment. Jack Smith didn't have to do that. When describing a December 29th conversation between then President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence, Jack Smith did not have to include the phrase, as reflected in the vice president's contemporaneous notes. Jack Smith referred to the vice president's contemporaneous notes more than once in the indictment to make it very clear to Donald Trump right now what he is up against in this case, and to make it clear to the American people how solid the prosecution's evidence is in this case. Donald Trump was eventually going to discover, through the legal discovery process of evidence, that Mike Pence took notes of Donald Trump's conversations, and the prosecution has those notes. The indictment clearly implies that everything that appears in quotation marks in Donald Trump's conversations with Mike Pence comes from Mike Pence's notes, including the line, "You're too honest." As I emphasized here at this hour last night, Donald Trump saying, "You're too honest," to Mike Pence is going to be the headline of the Trump trial coverage the day Mike Pence raises his right hand to take an oath as a witness to tell the truth about Donald Trump. That is the day Mike Pence will tell a jury in a criminal trial in Washington, D.C., that on January 1st, 2021, when he told Donald Trump once again that the vice president did not have, quote, the authority to reject or return votes to the states under the Constitution, the defendant told the vice president, "You're too honest." Everything that Jack Smith needs to prove under the laws cited in the indictment is in that exchange. There is the President of the United States trying to obstruct an official proceeding and conspiring to defraud the United States. That exchange contains Donald Trump's knowledge that what Mike Pence said to him is true. The vice president has no authority to reject electoral votes. That exchange contains what appears to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump knew that he was lying about the vice president's authority, and he was lying to Mike Pence about the vice president's authority. That exchange contains proof of Donald Trump's true state of mind, and yet another attempt by Donald Trump to obstruct an official proceeding. Some of the most compelling testimony presented by the January 6th committee is not part of this indictment at all, including this conversation between Cassidy Hutchinson and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
Or the motorcade ride driving back to the White House, and I said, like, does the president really think that he lost? And he said, you know, a lot of times he'll tell me that he lost, but he wants to keep fighting it, and he thinks that there might be enough to overturn the election, but you know, he pretty much has acknowledged that he's lost.
You're not going to see testimony like that at the trial. The January 6th committee was able to present evidence publicly like that might not even be admissible in the trial, that might be hearsay, for example. The January 6th committee was able to allow witnesses to tell a narrative story in a way that made clear sense to an audience without being peppered by questions and lawyers' objections. In the areas where the January 6th committee's presentation overlaps with what will be the criminal trial in this case, the January 6th committee's presentation is probably more clear and more human and more compelling than what we might hear in court. Here is a piece of evidence developed by the January 6th committee that does appear in the indictment as an indication that Donald Trump knew that he lost the election.
So we're in the Oval and there's a discussion going on. And the president says, I think it could have been Pompeo, but he says words to the effect of, yeah, we lost, we need to let that issue go to the next guy, meaning President Biden.
America was ready for this indictment and able to understand the credibility of most of what is in this indictment thanks to the work of the January 6th committee. When the Capitol was under attack on January 6th, the Speaker of the House got word that the president wanted to come to the Capitol.
Secret Service said they have dissuaded him from coming to Capitol Hill. They told him they don't have the resources to protect him here. So at the moment, he is not coming, but that could change.
Oh, he comes, I'm gonna punch him out. This is
Oh,
my
wow,
moment.
I would pay to see
I've
that.
been waiting for this, for trespassing on the Capitol grounds. I'm gonna punch him out, and I'm gonna go to jail, and I'm gonna be happy.
She's not going to jail, and he is now indicted for what he did that day.